How's it going, everybody? So in this video I'm going to be reading to you all a kind of like back and forth between me and some random person on Instagram on one of Sean Baker's posts. The reason why I think this is important to discuss is, number one, because it highlights some very important things to understand about gut microbiome research. But number two, I think it also highlights some very important points to consider anytime you engage in a back and forth with a random person on the internet. And by random, what I really mean is just someone who you don't know. Like, you don't know the state of their mental health, you don't know what they do or their level of education or whatever. Generally on Instagram, if they have a picture and a full profile done, then it's a little bit more it's a little bit easier to see where they're coming from, which this person does. So let's just dive in and we'll have a dialogue afterwards, okay? So, and I already made a video kind of discussing this very conversation and some of the flaws in the research just yesterday. So we'll dive a little bit deeper now because the conversation has progressed a little bit. So, this was on a post by Sean Baker. He says, to date, there have been a handful of studies on an actual carnivore diet, including 3 of them in 2021. 100% of the published studies, that's 3 studies, show the carnivore diet to result in significant health improvements. This should be the default assumption, he says, which I don't agree with at all. I don't think 3 studies on the carnivore diet is sufficient. And I already explained where I stand with the carnivore community in my video yesterday. But just as a summary, I follow a mostly animal-based diet. I was on a carnivore diet for 2 years strictly, but I'm not dogmatic. I don't think plants are bad. I don't think carbs are bad, and I don't think meat is magic. And I don't really care for a lot of the propaganda and the conspiracies and stuff that a lot of these carnivore gurus share. So yeah, I think the carnivore diet is useful as a elimination strategy. Some people can, there's thousands of people healing lifetime chronic autoimmune illness and other health conditions that literally carnivore is the only thing that helped them. And when they try to introduce any kind of plant foods at all, according to these people, their symptoms come back. So it doesn't mean plants are bad, it just means these specific people have health problems that are for some reason triggered by these plant foods. Okay, so yeah, again, I don't think plants are bad or poisonous or anything, but I think the research on plant foods and phytonutrients and the gut microbiome is almost entirely based on correlations, and I think it's a lot more nuanced, and a lot of people kind of miss the correlation versus causation and the confounding variables that probably play a bigger impact on a lot of these health outcomes found in these studies than the interventions being studied themselves. For example, studies on fruit and vegetable intake. They're cohort studies, population studies done on thousands of people over a very long period of time, and they find decreased risk of disease with more fruit and vegetable intake. The problem is the people who are eating the most fruits and vegetables in these studies that have the best health outcomes are also the same people that are exercising 5 times a week. They're avoiding a lot of the most harmful foods in the food supply that we know cause disease, like trans fats, refined sugars, not to say they're necessarily bad. They're eating a healthy diet, living a healthy lifestyle, and they're avoiding poisonous foods. And it's a meaningless term, nebulous term, but it is the reality is basically that they're just healthier people in general. And it's likely that the totality of their lifestyle is what's contributing to their health, and to what degree plant foods are contributing, we don't really know. So the point is, those cohort studies, population studies, those are completely observational. They are not studying the intervention itself. They're studying those types of people and their lifestyles as a whole, and are categorizing them based on, you know, fruit and vegetable intake. And in this case that we're about to talk about, the same thing applies, but to the gut microbiome rather than fruits and vegetables over a long period of time. So let's, you know, hopefully you understand what I'm getting at here with this correlation does not equal causation thing. I'm not saying fruits and vegetables are bad, and there are a lot of plant foods that have been shown in intervention trials to have a very beneficial effect on health markers. But, you know, if I eat a shit ton of broccoli every day of my life, like a couple pounds of broccoli over 10 years, is that really going to make me substantially healthier? Or is exercising, you know, and, you know, avoiding trans fats, etc., you know, and of course you can do both. But there's, you know, we have evidence to the contrary that actually shows, you know, like polyphenols and some of these antioxidant compounds in plants, when they're taken as a supplement form, they actually don't provide any benefit whatsoever, and over the long term seem to increase your risk of certain diseases. For example, beta-carotene and lung cancer. You know, that's one that's heavily talked about. Also vitamin E and stroke. So it's not completely clear what, you know, part of these plant foods supposedly have benefits. Again, this is what I'm doing here is highlighting the reason why observational studies and long cohort studies do not, you know, they're not, it's not that they're meaningless or that they're not helpful, it's just that they're not enough, and they do not imply causation, you know. So let's see, let's find, and so the gut microbiome research is the same thing as I mentioned in that previous video. Let's find my freaking comment here, okay? Sorry that I'm taking so long. Let's see, oh, here it is. Okay, so this guy, Langford Surfin, says, I am eagerly awaiting research on the effects of carnivore diet on the gut microbiome. Okay, and I just asked, why? There's zero causal evidence between the gut microbiome and health outcomes. So I want to know, why is this person eagerly awaiting for research on gut microbiome and carnivore diet, the effects of carnivore diet on the gut microbiome? Like, what is the reason? Because, you know, depending on the reason that you're interested in research on the effects of carnivore diet on the microbiome, either, you know, like, there are reasons why you would want to have that data, but if you're, you know, trying to say that, you know, I want to see if the carnivore diet causes an unhealthy gut microbiome or something like that, or improves the gut microbiome, that is faulty reasoning, because we don't actually know what is a healthy microbiome and what are the implications of that. Like, you know, the gut microbiome is literally a reflection of our environment, our lifestyle, and the foods that we eat. There are plenty of intervention studies where they will give probiotic supplements and prebiotic supplements, and they test and they actually see these supplements change the microbiome composition over time, but they don't get any changes in health outcomes. So we have studies that show probiotics and prebiotics can change the gut microbiome, but there's no actual, like, change in health outcomes from that change in microbiome. And what we're interested in is health outcomes. So I don't understand why people are so fixated on microbiome when our goal is improved health. So that's exactly what I'm trying to get across here. There's zero causal evidence between the gut microbiome and health outcomes. Like, why are you interested in studies on the gut microbiome and the carnivore diet? And then some person, Holly Warner Health, okay, said, have you ever heard of the Human Microbiome Project? Dr. Knight, Dr. Grace Liu, and these are just people that, discuss a lot of the evidence and surrounding the microbiome. And so I just asked her, I just said explain, just very basically, because, she's asked me if I've heard of this cohort study. The Human Microbiome Project is a cohort study. It's just in the very beginning stages. I think it's only been talked about for like a year, maybe 2 years now. So there's no actual evidence coming out of the Human Microbiome Project yet. It's just beginning. I believe it's a study out of National Institutes of Health. Some of the same people who funded the Nurses' Health Study and some of the other cohort trials that link, like 2 pounds of fruits and vegetables a day to greater health outcomes and decreased risk of disease. It's like, that's great, but we need intervention trials that actually show this intervention actually is what's causing the greater health outcomes in these cohort trials. So yeah, the Human Microbiome Project, not even started yet. It's a cohort study. Even in 30 years, when we actually have data from this cohort study, it's not going to be able to show that changes in the gut microbiome themselves cause greater health outcomes or worse health outcomes. It's just going to show, it's literally all it's going to show is over the course of 30 years, people who ate a healthy diet pattern and lived a healthy lifestyle, they have a certain composition of gut microbiome. And people who ate a lot of sugar and refined foods and lived an unhealthy lifestyle, didn't exercise, didn't get out in nature, they're going to have worse health outcomes and they're going to have their own specific gut microbiome. It is not going to show changes in gut microbiome independent of diet, lifestyle, and exercise cause these health outcomes. So I don't understand why that's her reply. My comment, again, to the original poster, not her, the original poster, why are you interested in long-term studies of the carnivore diet on the gut microbiome? There is zero causal evidence between the gut microbiome and health outcomes. Her response, have you heard of this giant cohort study that hasn't even started yet? I'm asking for causal evidence, not a giant cohort study that's only going to be able to show a multitude of correlations. So already I'm asking for a certain thing and she's sending me something completely different. So I asked her explain, and she didn't explain. I don't think she's capable of explaining. It seems like she's just watching these experts on the podcast and then repeating the things they say. Because I want to know why, So explain. And she says, Google it and it will be obvious. Bro, that's the same freaking thing that anybody who doesn't understand what they're talking about says. They'll refer you to an expert or a study. And then when you ask them, well, can you explain why that's relevant? They say, Google it and you'll understand. Oh, okay. I think if you were unaware of this cohort study that can't prove causation, then you shouldn't be making the statements that you have made. What was my statement? There's no causal evidence that the gut microbiome causes health outcomes. That's what I said, and she sent me a correlation study. So I'm not aware of this cohort study only able to show correlations. That hasn't even started yet. There's no data that came out of that trial yet. Because it's still in its infancy. And you're telling me to Google this study and I'm unaware of it and I shouldn't be asking for causal evidence. I'm unaware of a correlation study and therefore I shouldn't be asking for causation. Oh, wow. Clearly we're off to a great start. And And so I told her, yes, I'm aware of it. What you're missing is that this form of research is examining the composition of bacteria in participants' microbiome and then correlating it with health outcomes. Unfortunately, the confounding variable is that the food that they eat and the lifestyle they live are entirely what controls the composition of bacteria in their gut. And it's more likely that the food and lifestyle that these participants in that study are engaging in are what controls the health outcomes, not the microbiome itself. It makes a lot more sense to run randomized controlled trials with different nutrition and lifestyle interventions for evidence on causing health outcomes rather than fixating on the gut microbiome, which is just a reflection of of the diet and the lifestyle. It's not actually like the root cause. It's just a reflection. If you eat broccoli, you're going to have lots of broccoli-eating bacteria in your gut. If you eat refined sugar, you're going to have refined sugar-eating bacteria in your gut. But if you take a probiotic supplement that implements those bacteria in your gut, you're not going to have the same benefits as if you were to eat broccoli, or the same effects as if you were to eat the sugar itself. The bacteria is not as important, besides maybe cravings. It's the intervention trials, I say interventions, the lifestyle, the diet that is causing the microbiome changes. It's also going to cause health outcomes. It's the diet and the lifestyle. It's causing both the microbiome composition and the health outcomes. It's not the microbiome. You can't just implement bacteria into someone's gut and then create a health outcome. That's the point I'm trying to make. We have yet to see that. And the reason I make that so clear and why I'm trying to point this out to people is because this is what a lot of these gut experts are so obsessed with. My classic examples, Dr. Mark Hyman, these people, they're like, yeah, it's the gut microbiome, it's the gut microbes that cause your blood sugar control, and they control your mood, and they, you want a healthy microbiome to prevent diabetes. It's like, bro, you can literally have whatever gut microbiome you want through supplementation, but if you still engage in the lifestyle factors that cause diabetes, you're going to have diabetes. And, obviously, if you're engaging in lifestyle factors that cause diabetes, you're going to have a gut microbiome that reflects diabetes and those lifestyle factors. It's a middleman between the lifestyle and the health outcomes. It is not a causal thing. I don't know how many times, how many ways I'm going to have to explain that for people. So I just told her, it's the food and lifestyle that we should be focused on, not the microbiome, for health outcomes. I want to see causal research, not that cohort study, right? Correlation does not equal causation, hence my original comment. And I was very respectful in this comment. I'm just trying to progress the discussion. And then she says, spoken like a true health coach, but not an actual scientist. That's a pill to authority. And it just sounds a bit arrogant. It's not, has nothing to do with what I said. I'm just asking her to explain the logic and her reasoning. Spoken like a true health coach, but not like an actual scientist. The microbiome, gut, oral, slime, etc. Slime? Is complex and takes years of study to get even a baseline. Your statement above show you've got a very, statements above show you've got a very small grasp on a very large situation. Simply eating a steak, some organ meat, and some salt with a side of fat is not going to fix everything. We need to admit that this lifestyle, which is pretty close to perfect, will need adaptation and assistance in some cases. We need to look at all the data, what long-term is happening within the gut. If we lose specific bacteria from a genus or species is only needed for carbs, is this really an issue? Can we re-inoculate if we decide later to change this way of eating? Going blindly song without looking at all the data is irresponsible. Food and lifestyle are a baseline but not always enough. Okay, so I agree with literally everything that this person said for the most part, and obviously except for, telling me like my opinion is not, oh, I'm not a scientist, I'm a health coach. And really, I just barfed up this comment, these replies, in what short time I had in between clients. It's not like I was trying to formulate a scientific review paper in Instagram comments. So of course I shouldn't sound like an actual scientist. So let's kind of debunk this point by point. And it's not even debunking, but spoken like a true health coach, but not like an actual scientist. Okay, that's appeal to authority. Whether I'm a health coach or a scientist or whatever, has nothing to do with the validity of my arguments. And I've gone to this woman's Instagram page to see what's her level of education, right? And it says Holly Warner Health, she, her. She has the I don't know what to call it, but a flag that represents her sexuality. That's fine. She calls her, it says public figure, clinical expert, patient advocate / pro science, hormone replacement, thyroid autoimmune specialist, blah blah blah, sassy carnivore, and she says she's a lesbian, and that's all good. I have nothing against any of that, but a clinical expert, patient advocate, pro-science. I looked at her website. It says she's a clinical nutrition specialist or something. Is that CNS? Something like that. Functional medicine practitioner. She has all of these names she uses, but all of these names she uses are things that generally people can call themselves without an actual degree or legitimate education. And I know that there's certain certifications that can only be obtained with a certain level of college education, but none of the things she called herself really represented somebody who even has she's not a scientist either, is what I'm trying to get at. She's not a scientist either, and I didn't tell her before she blocked me, which is just ridiculous. But I actually have a college education as well. I have multiple nutrition certifications that are pretty robust, which is not important. And I'm currently in school right now on the path to eventually get my PhD in nutrition science. But I am in no way, shape, or form on the level of, a PhD or anything like that. I have multiple clients that have PhDs, in different forms of science. One PhD in data analysis, and I send her these studies all the time. We're always talking about all of these things. We're talking about, lately we've been talking exactly about this. Correlation is not equal causation. Even in these large cohort studies and things, the percentage of risk is generally relative risk. Almost never is clinically significant. And as a clinical practitioner like herself, supposedly, this person, Holly Warner Health, she should know the difference between relative risk and absolute risk, and how to interpret studies in a way that represents clinical significance, let alone, not statistical significance, which is not really that clinically significant when we're talking about these large cohort studies of thousands of people. So, that's all I'm saying is, we can't extrapolate correlation with causation, and I would like to see causation research. But, as clinically expertise, her clinical expertise is having a hard time swallowing this need for causal evidence on what actually causes health outcomes. It's just a crazy disconnect. You know, it just doesn't seem like she actually has the experience that she claims to have. But yeah, I can't find a college education or anything on her website. So I'm like, okay, you know, spoken like a true health coach, but not like an actual scientist. That's called appeal to authority. It doesn't, you know, I just want you to like, you know, discuss my points. Like, that's all. I don't care what you call me, right? So the microbiome is complex, she says, and takes years to study to even get a baseline. Okay, so it takes years to get a baseline on the microbiome. Okay, so what makes you think we're ever going to have, you know, studies that actually show, you know, eating broccoli is going to cause broccoli-eating bacteria, for example, if it takes years to actually establish that? And first of all, it doesn't take years. It does not. It takes about 2 weeks to actually detect broccoli-eating bacteria after eating broccoli. And I just use broccoli as one example, but any food. Same thing with like sugar. There's studies that actually show when you eat refined sugar, you detect species of bacteria that actually consumes that refined sugar. And that's like its only purpose, and it goes away after 2 weeks of not eating that food, which also reflects anecdotes of people's cravings. So it doesn't take a whole year to establish that. So what baseline are you actually talking about here? It takes years to study to get even a baseline, she says. So if it takes years to establish what a healthy microbiome is, you know, and all you have is like correlation studies, how do we know why we call it a healthy microbiome? It's just a gut bacteria that reflects a healthy lifestyle. Okay? If you eat a carnivore diet or whatever, you eat a vegan diet, and then you have more bacteria that represents a unhealthy microbiome, it says nothing about the health outcomes you're going to get. It just says, oh, your bacteria is similar to what's been correlated with unhealthy food or unhealthy lifestyle patterns or whatever. It's kind of like the same thing as saying, you know, don't eat red meat because, you know, we have these large observational trials that show the more red meat someone eats, the more cancer they supposedly have, even though it's not even clinically significant, the findings. The percentage of risk is not clinically significant, but people still use that as like a causation argument. And so, you know, this is the problem I have, is like we have these experts like Mark Hyman and Stephen Gundry and Joel Furman and Michael Greger who they want you to eat this plant-based diet because they claim it creates a healthy microbiome. That's like a predominant argument. And I'm just trying to, you know, bring that awareness that focusing on the microbiome is a distraction. We want to know we want to eat a diet that's going to cause the health outcomes that we want. So, you know, the microbiome being complex and taking years to study a baseline, how do you know that the food, that the microbiome itself is causing health outcomes when it's so complex it takes years to get a baseline? And the other thing is that it takes years to get a baseline. We've only been studying the microbiome for like extensively, like the last decade maybe, right? So I don't know what this, like what she's saying has nothing to do with my point. She's actually creating her own argument, discussing a completely different point that has nothing to do with my original point. Your statements above show you've got a very small grasp on a very large situation. So the problem isn't that I have a small grasp on the situation. The problem is that she's trying to argue a point she's trying to argue a separate point than myself. I'm just saying, you know, the microbiome itself probably does not directly cause health outcomes. And we need studies that actually show change in microbiome will change health outcomes independent of lifestyle factors and diet. That's all I'm saying. And she's saying, and now here's where she explains the whole completely different point that she's arguing, which I agree with. Simply eating a steak, some organ meat, and some salt with a side of fat is not going to fix everything. It depends on what you mean by fix. You know, what are you trying to fix exactly? That's the thing. Like, if you're trying to solve an autoimmune illness and then you want to add plants back into your diet, then yeah, you're not going to be able to do that by just going on this carnivore diet and adding plant foods back in, because you'll trigger symptoms. That is true. There is an underlying kind of like, again, intermediate between the food that you're eating and then the symptoms. But, you know, changing the microbiome itself, is that really going to solve the issue? I mean, I need some evidence to point that, is what I'm saying. I need some evidence that shows fixating on the microbiome and taking prebiotics, probiotics, and whatever, acacia gum or whatever other prebiotic or postbiotic supplement that these freaking charlatans are trying to sell people. I need evidence that that's going to actually help these people with autoimmune conditions add plants back into their diet. You know? I just think removing the suffering is enough. But yeah, sure, I would love to see some causal evidence that this is possible as well. Again, that human microbiome project she's talking about is not really going to give us the evidence we need to establish this, but whatever. So yeah, we need to admit that this lifestyle, which is pretty close to perfect, she says, will need adaptation and assistance in some cases. We need to look at data. Okay, so correlation data is not going to give you the information you need to make changes and adaptations and assistance to these people. It might help to guide us towards deeper study that can lead us to solutions, but these correlation studies themselves are not the be all end all. They're hardly even close. Like, especially just, you know, the microbiome research. Like, it's not what you really should be looking at, in my opinion. In my opinion, by the way. We need to look at all the data. What long-term is happening within the gut. Okay. So we need, she's saying we need long-term observational trials that show what gut bacteria is resulting from what lifestyle interventions and diets. I just don't see how that's going to, like, why does that matter? Even for what she, like, for her point, why does that matter exactly? If we lose specific bacteria from a genus or species that's only needed for carbs, is this really an issue? Okay, observing people's gut microbiome, reflecting their lifestyle and diet over decades is not going to help you figure out, if you can re-add carbs back in after a carnivore diet without negative symptoms. It's not. However, if we have, 20 years of somebody on a carnivore diet, which, by the way, I sincerely doubt there's many people in a lot of these cohort studies that she's talking about that are actually even on an actual carnivore diet, let alone a ketogenic diet. It's very rare for anyone to even do that. We're talking about free-living people being studied in these cohort trials. We're not talking about specialized populations that she's a part of. She calls herself a sassy carnivore. She's probably more dogmatic about carnivore than I am. She calls herself a carnivore. I don't call myself a carnivore because I don't even eat a strict carnivore diet. I don't even believe that's necessary. So, it's just weird. But what we need is somebody in our specialized population who's eating a carnivore diet for 20 years to then suddenly add carbs and plant foods back in and see what happens. Now, sure, we could study the gut microbiome and its response. Like, what's going to happen? Like, maybe they have more, they suddenly have like an episode of like candida that just like spikes up out of nowhere and consumes your entire body from adding, like, that's not, that's an exaggeration, but I'm wondering what study she wants exactly, how are they going to, how are you going to extrapolate a cohort study on free living populations towards helping you figure out what's going to happen when you add plant foods and carbs back in after a long term on carnivore. It just doesn't make any sense. But I agree, though. I would like to see evidence on this as well. I would love to see what, but not on the microbiome. I want to see the symptoms that come back, and I'd like to see them focus on something like, an intervention like modifying gut bacteria to allow them to eat more carbs. Like, maybe you could do such a thing, right? I don't know. Can we re-inoculate if we decide later to change this way of eating? Like, you should probably look at some of the long-term low-carb and carnivore people who were carnivore for a long time and they re-added plants or something. Like, you should look at that. But if you have a serious autoimmune condition and that is treated via any kind of elimination diet, even if it's carnivore, she's more of an advocate of the carnivore than I am. I would say I'm way more balanced in my approach than she is. I'm not a carnivore. I have my clients eating plant foods and stuff unless they have a condition that requires otherwise. She said, can we re-inoculate if we decide later to change the way of eating? I'd love to know, but I don't think your human gut microbiome project is going to help unless they actually have people on a 40-year intervention, and then they control their diet, and they force them to change their intervention after 40 years. That doesn't happen in these studies. Like, do you even know what these studies are? Like, yeah. Going blindly without looking at all data is irresponsible. Okay, so I'm asking, I'm asking people, why do you care so much about observational trials and gut microbiome over a long period of time? So I want to know why they want to know. But I'm saying there's no causal evidence that shows health outcomes result from changing the microbiome. I've said that millions of times in this already. And she's telling me it's irresponsible to go blindly without looking at all the data. Okay, so I'm assuming that this is actually her reasoning for being interested in long-term carnivore data. So yeah, again, I agree we should get long-term data for sure. But is looking at a long 40-year cohort study and, how much plant food someone ate, how much meat someone ate, what diseases they got, and then the changes in the microbiome that happen in these people. But we don't even know if it's a direct result of what. Like, we don't. Sure, we can extrapolate it from mechanistic jargon. Like, how is it more responsible to look at long-term studies on microbiome? Like, I don't think that's irresponsible. If we had causal evidence that said, hey, if you have, through whatever, it doesn't matter what intervention causes it, but if you put somehow, helicopter bacterius in your intestine, that you're going to freaking have a heart attack. Like, we have a causal link, like something that shows, like, you have this bacterial strain and it causes heart disease, whether it's through probiotic, supplementing the bacteria itself, or the lifestyle intervention. That is this bacteria for sure, And then my intervention actually causes that bacteria to increase, then sure, that would be irresponsible. But, like, it's not irresponsible to, like, ask for causal evidence on the microbiome. And I don't think it's irresponsible to disregard correlation evidence as, guiding our recommendations. And saying that it's irresponsible. She is a freaking carnivore advocate and I'm not. So, I'm not even telling people, I'm telling people to eat a diet that's supported by mainstream evidence. I tell people to eat as much fruits and vegetables as they'd like, provided the specific fruits are not super high on the glycemic load. Eat whole foods first, if you're going to eat something off this way of eating, but generally, any kind of non-starchy vegetable and eating fruits, especially berries, basically the foods that have the highest statistical benefit supposedly in these cohort studies. Eat as much of those as you want, and then base your diet on animal protein. For my weight loss clients, lean animal protein, and that's going to, even change your LDL, which we don't have causal evidence that that's a risk factor for disease. It's going to put all your blood markers in the healthy range. It's going to fix the majority of your issues, and issues you didn't even think you had. A lot of people, when they eat this way and they remove the grains, nuts, seeds, legumes, obviously they'll lose weight. It's a huge chunk of calories, but also any autoimmune condition or something that might have been triggered will go away, And so they're getting all the fiber and all the stuff people think are healthy that we don't really have a lot of causal evidence on. But it's not irresponsible at all. Yet we have like a sassy carnivore who claims to be a clinical nutritionist telling me I'm irresponsible. That's irresponsible, not obsessed with the microbiome. It's just completely ridiculous. And I just think that she just doesn't understand where I'm, like, my point or where I'm coming from. Yet she's giving me these long paragraphs to try to whatever. So she said food and lifestyle are a baseline, but not always enough. What do you mean? You think you need probiotic supplements? And the other thing, again, we go to her freaking profile. She's a functional medicine this and blah, blah, blah. And then she has like testimonials on here. Is she I think she's selling, she's selling CBD. She's a supplement salesperson, I suppose. She's a hormone replacement person, autoimmune thyroid specialist, advocates carnivore diet, tells people to take vitamin B1 and all these other things. I bet you she sells freaking supplements, and that's why she wants to believe the microbiome is so important. Because she wants to tell her clients or whatever to buy back probiotic supplements. I can't believe I didn't even catch that at first. Because it doesn't make any sense otherwise. She's not really arguing against my point. So, food and lifestyle are a baseline, but not always enough. So that implies you need something more. She said you need assistance and blah, blah, blah. So I'm assuming maybe she thinks this, to add on to the lifestyle and food, maybe you need supplements, I guess. That would make more sense. So my reply, the ad hominem attacks and appeal to authority are unnecessary. Seriously, we're adults. I actually agree with everything you said, minus the weird superiority complex projection at the beginning. Long-term data is important, and the microbiome is indeed complex. But it seems you've completely missed my point, and I really don't have time to make another detailed response, only for it to fall on deaf ears. Meanwhile, I'm making a whole hour-long video on this. My point is, we need intervention trials showing changing bacteria in the gut microbiome can actually induce clinically significant changes in health outcomes. Before we start aiming to modify the gut microbiome as a health practice or value the composition of gut bacteria as a marker of good health. So I'm saying we shouldn't be, before we try to aim to modify gut microbiome directly to change health outcomes, we should get some evidence that actually is going to make a difference on health outcomes. It's very simple. If an intervention provides the health benefits you desire for decades, why exactly would you care about the gut bacteria that reflect the diet? We're interested in health outcomes, so to me it makes sense to focus on what interventions are going to improve health outcomes, which is why I keep asking for causal evidence that changing the gut microbiome directly can actually cause clinically significant changes in health outcomes. So then apparently she blocked me, but luckily my colleague let me see it on her phone, on their phone. Not that it even matters. I really was tired of replying at that point. I'd rather make a video like this so all of you all can gather the information and get benefit. But she says, must be nice to have all that time on your hands. I've been in clinic all morning. Zero time for nonsense with a personal trainer. Again, appeal to authority, superiority complex. Zero time for nonsense with a personal trainer. All I asked is for causal evidence. That's all I asked. And I'm just discussing the limitations in the cohort study. But it's nonsense with the personal trainer. It's not even worth her time, apparently. Appeal to authority? That's a cute way of saying you're undereducated and underqualified. You're bringing a knife to a gunfight, and it's really quite amusing. Okay, meanwhile, she has no information on her own education level to begin with. And she's like a functional medicine practitioner who sells supplements and things to her clients. And we don't even know if she has a college level education or not. And she's not discussing my points directly. She's making her own case, which again I agree with. Even though I still have there's still holes in it. There is so much data out there. If you understood how to interpret it, clearly you do not, and that's fine given your level of view, qualifications, or lack thereof. Where the fuck are your qualifications? What is wrong with my interpretation? That's why you should tell me, discuss my points and tell me what's wrong with my interpretation of it. It doesn't sound like we're interpreting things differently. It sounds like she's extrapolating a completely different point with different evidence, and I'm just asking for causal evidence because I care about health outcomes. But I also do think long-term cohort studies aren't going to show the effect, but we should care about what happens to long-term carnivore diets on health outcomes, not on fucking microbiome. I want to see, are you going to have a heart attack, are you going to die, whatever. I don't want to see, do you have a certain bacteria in your gut because you ate meat all your life. I don't care about that. That's like mental masturbation. I want to see, are they going to die, are you going to have more disease, whatever, as a result of this intervention. And all of my recommendations are based on intervention trials and cohort studies. Okay, but she's a carnivore advocate. We don't have intervention trials on that, let alone cohort studies. So, yeah, okay, Miss Science-based person doesn't have a college degree listed on her website. Okay. And she says, go back to school and let's chat when you come prepared. Right now, you're a waste of my time. I never even began talking to her in the first place. I asked for causal evidence, and then she replied to me with a cohort study, and then slamming me for not being concerned about her cohort study that hasn't even started yet. This is really ridiculous. Oh, and she blocked me. Why? Why would you block me? I'm not slandering you. I'm just trying to progress the conversation further. I'm replying to your slander though. So I replied, but kind of stupid, but I don't really care. I'm actually currently in school, on my way to eventually get my PhD in nutrition science, but I don't like to throw my level of education around in order to discredit other people's opinions. And really, my level of education is nothing special anyway. But I don't like to throw my education around in order to discredit other people's opinions. I'd rather actually discuss their points, I really don't understand why you're taking this so personally. I mean, you actually blocked me. Why on earth would you do that? That's extremely strange and does not reflect the opinion of someone who's educated or works in a professional setting. Seriously. Good thing I could see your comment on my colleague's phone. I don't know why it's a good thing. It's because I'm so interested in all of this, scientific discussion. To reply to your overly emotional comment. The problem here is that it sounds like you're arguing a completely different point than myself. She's saying we need long-term evidence to see what would happen if we add carbs and plants back in, after a long couple decades of being carnivore. It's yeah, I agree. Too bad that cohort study you sent me isn't really going to show that. And also, she's saying she wants to find out what's going to happen to the microbiome after 40 years. I'm saying I want to know what's going to happen to my heart, to my blood sugar control, etc. if I add plants back in after, or after eating meat exclusively for a couple decades. I want to know what is going to change in my health outcomes. That's what I want to know. I don't want to know what bacteria changes, right? Which is something, so all I said originally, so like I said, I actually agree with what you're saying. All I said originally was that I want to see causal evidence between the gut microbiome and health outcomes, which is something the cohort study you reference is just in the beginning stages cannot provide, since it's a cohort study and not an intervention trial. So in conclusion, yeah, I want to see what happens after eating a carnivore diet for a couple decades. I want to see specifically what health outcomes happen. So that would be great. I don't really care about what happens in the microbiome after like several years. I care about the health outcomes. And that's why I originally asked for causal evidence. So not a microbiome study over a couple decades, but a cohort study on fucking carnivore dieters over a couple decades would be interesting. That actually measures blood markers of health outcomes, whatever that might be, and questionnaires on incidences of disease and things. Like, I don't want to see like what strains of bacteria in your gut. That's not important. That's all I was saying. And she freaked out, blocked me, and she's a freaking college-level educated scientist, she claims. I think she's a supplement salesman is what it is. And she wants to believe that her probiotic supplements will improve her client's health over a couple decades. Like, literally, people that rely on these like cohort and correlation studies and get overly emotional about them is because their whole practice is invested in that. Look, I don't give a shit. I'm just trying to have people use real interventions that will give you real results. That's what I care about. I want you to be healthy. I want you to, I don't really care about like, microbiome and all this nonsense unless it has something to do with, are you going to die of a disease or not? That's what I care about. So anyway, I got to go to my next client. I've got like 5 minutes to get dressed. So talk to you all next time.